private property implies a certain sense of privacy, but a northern Michigan lawmaker says more can be done, especially when it comes to conservation officers and private property. A bill has been proposed in Lansing that would require, in many cases, a conservation officer with the DNR, much like a traditional police officer, to get a warrant before going on private land.
It's a pleasure to be testifying before you today on my House Bill 4073 that would require DNR conservation officers to obtain a warrant before entering private property.
And with that, committee testimony began on proposed House Bill 4073, introduced by State Representative Dave Prestin of the Central UP.
I think every long-term property owner, at least up in my neck of the woods, has a story at one point in time or another where they've either wandered across a conservation officer on their property, really not even doing anything, related to that property owner.
And this, Representative Prestin believes, would help limit that by essentially requiring the DNR's conservation officers to get a search warrant before entering private property.
This bill is not designed to unnecessarily restrict the duties of conservation officers. It is designed to find a balance. We can and should find that balance and balance the responsibilities of our conservation officers with the privacy rights of our citizens.
If passed, this legislation wouldn't require a warrant if the property owner authorized access, or if the officer is actively pursuing a suspect, or to stop the destruction of evidence. But supporters say it would create a better privacy boundary for property owners when it comes to what some describe as searches geared towards finding an offense.
Unfortunately, the Michigan DNR seems to depend on these sorts of searches to enforce state law in certain circumstances.
Most everyone can probably appreciate privacy, especially when it comes to the land they own. But not everyone agrees this is necessary for that.
I'll be very clear that our officers are not permitted to randomly enter private property without a clear reason to do so.
DNR Law Enforcement Chief Jason Haynes says it's important that COs have access to private land, following best practices and guidelines in order to do their job.
78% of the lands in the state of Michigan are under private ownership. And as written, this bill would essentially translate into little to no enforcement and protection for those resources on those private lands.
And that having to get a warrant in almost every situation beyond those excluded in the proposed legislation would dramatically delay their investigation and be an unnecessary drain on an already limited resource.
A situation that could have likely been handled in perhaps 30 minutes or less. Now we've got multiple hours wrapped up into this, and this clearly takes up a lot more time of the conservation officer that could be out handling, responding to other complaints, or conducting proactive patrols.
A second bill has been introduced that would require conservation officers to wear body cameras. As of right now, both bills sit in the House Natural Resource and Tourism Committee awaiting for a potential vote in order to advance to the House floor.